Hi, today we're going to be talking about succulents and their close cousins, the cacti. We'll be talking about how to present them in your home and what to take into consideration as far as light and watering needs go, and also how to arrange them so you have a little bit more oomph in your plant display. First of all, you're going to want to know that succulents have different categories of needs. So generally, in the most general terms, many of our succulents that are very colorful or rosette shaped, some that color change, as you can see, some of these are turning red. They are going to need a lot of sunlight, a lot of direct sunlight for hours at a time. So this means you'd want to place something like this in an afternoon lit window, or if you have a grow light, that would be something that would do very well underneath a grow light. Other types of succulents are going to need more indirect light, and in general we find they are more branching. You can see they grow in segments off of each other. They are very dark green, means they have more chlorophyll for photosynthesis, so they can go a little bit further from extremely direct lit spaces. These might be better if you don't have any super sunny windows, aren't investing in grow lights, or just need a little contrast. These types aren't going to grow in the same way as the more colorful types or the cacti. They need more light, or they need more indirect. So if you do a mixture of a cactus and a sunny succulent and a ripsalis or a jade, you're gonna get some crazy elongation from these guys. They might get sunburnt because they're too bright, or if you don't have a bright enough spot, these guys are gonna get a really long neck and they're just not gonna look like succulents anymore. And poor little cactus might get a little cone head, meaning he's etiolating or searching for light. So do keep light needs in mind when you're choosing which succulents to play around with. Now, as far as watering goes, succulents tend to want watering every 3 to 4 weeks. It depends on the time of year, but they are succulents because they hold in a lot of water. Succulent means really juicy. So they are gonna go weeks, if not a good month in the wintertime, in between needing love and attention. So these are for looking at lovingly, not watering once a week. Now, as far as fertilizing succulents go, in cacti for that matter, you need to really hold back. They are actively growing in the spring and summer, which means that's about the only time that they would need any extra nutrients. However, succulents and cacti are used to, for the most part, growing in more arid, hot, dry places that maybe doesn't have the most nutritious of soil, and they can really just find their way in nooks and crannies and rocks and rubble. So whenever you do give your succulents and cacti a little extra, you're gonna make sure that your fertilizer of choice is either extra diluted with water, or you're using succulent specific fertilizer. And again, you're gonna follow instructions on any product that you use, and you're gonna tend to just keep that in the few growing months that we have here in the Midwest. So that's going to be late March all the way through August or September, but then you're gonna hold off completely in late fall and during the winter time. Now, when considering your containers, you're going to want to make sure that the container is shallow because succulents and cacti in general have very shallow root systems. You want to make sure that your soil is really loose, so any extra water that's in there is going to evaporate fairly quickly, so a shallow pot will help with that, as would a terracotta or unfinished clay pot. Porous materials like clay will allow extra quick evaporation. Just have to keep that in mind when you're watering. I will go ahead and talk about planting just a single guy. We don't necessarily at Honey Plant care if it has a hole or not. That's a question we get asked a lot, is if it has to have drainage holes. We tend to use horticultural charcoal. It's just a very fine powder. Sometimes you find it in chunks, but it is porous, so it will absorb any extra water. If you go a little heavy on it, it's not gonna help it if you just drown your plant. And it also has some antifungal properties, so basically what we would do is just add a small layer at the bottom, and that's just our emergency catch. It's gonna prevent fungal issues, absorb a little extra water if there's just a little extra to be had. And then what I'll do is I'll take my very gritty succulent soil. It's just very full of rocks and rice hulls, coconut coir, has a little bit of extra charcoal in it as well. And I'm going to fill the pot just about halfway. And let's see, for this time, I'm going to use the classic jade plant. It's a good, bright, indirect sort of succulent, one that I would have by nearly any window. I would probably avoid intense direct sun for too many hours of the day because it would get really red and a little withered looking if it was too intense. So this is a really great one to have for just general bright areas in your house. So I'll take it out, and I like to make sure that the root ball is kind of squished and crunched a little bit. These guys are so rugged, you don't have to be too gentle. They will keep growing new roots. That's all they want to do is grow, grow, grow. So I'm just gonna loosen that up, make sure the roots are healthy, and they are. So as you can see, big tall plant, little tiny shallow root system. So you don't need anything too big, it will hold too much water. So I'm gonna go ahead and place my little jade plant right there in the middle, and I'm gonna use my hands to pack it in. And you just kind of hold one in place and pack in that soil so there's no air bubbles, because whenever you do water it down the road, you don't want there to be a sinkhole. All right, so I got that all patted in. I've left a little layer for some decorative rocks. But first I'm gonna use my handy paintbrush and I'm going to brush off excess dirt. It's good to use a paintbrush instead of your fingers because some succulents tend to have very delicate hairs or just delicate skin. All right. I do like to add a little bit of water just to get it really connected in with the soil. Okay, so let's clear that off real quick and we'll talk about decorating. Okay, so what I tend to like to do is add some natural little pebbles or crystals or pieces of wood, just fun little natural elements. You can add a layer of pebbles or fish tank pebbles around the base. But before you put down any rocks, if you're gonna add anything like wood or something that you're gonna stick into the plant, this is cholla wood. This is actually a cactus skeleton, which is why I like using it. It's kind of bringing multiple elements of the cactus world into an arrangement. So I'm gonna cut up a piece of cholla wood and I'm gonna wiggle it down in there, and that's gonna really disrupt anything. It's gonna disrupt the dirt, it's gonna disrupt any rocks that you already put in there. So it's always good to put anything like that straight in right away before you add your rocks and pebbles. And just to offset and highlight that pretty little plant, maybe add a geode. Got some little crystals. I'm kind of in the camp of less is more. But then you've got just a pretty little plant, you've got a highlight, you just love jade, and then you've got your rocks and pebbles. Maybe you found some on a hike. It's just a good way to display everything you love in one little cup. Okay. Now, maybe you've got several succulents or cacti that you want to display. We've got to make sure we remember what we talked about at the beginning. Some of your succulents are really sun-loving, some are a little bit more bright and direct. Your cacti are going to be the most sun-loving. So something like this would be good planted all together, and something you would water about once a month. Then we've got our branching, more indirect light succulents. Those are gonna do well planted together. But then what we're gonna do for this one is we're gonna do our sun-loving succulents. And there goes my cholla wood. All right, so the sun-loving succulents. I've got several here. They would need that bright, sunny west-facing window or a grow light to really shine. I like to consider shape and color when putting together a colorful arrangement like this. I like to have a good green anchor, although this one will be more of a color changer. I like to have a rosette shape. Rosettes need intense light to keep that shape, otherwise they get long and stringy. And oh, there's so many fun sedums out there that have just such bright colors. So, going to add our small layer of horticultural charcoal. You can generally find this online pretty easily. Comes in quart-sized bags. We're going to add our taller elements first, after I add in a little layer of dirt here. All right, so we got that. Sometimes you need to crunch up the... All right, so we're going to start with the tall one. I'm going to break up the soil a little bit, just to loosen up the roots and make it come out just a little bit easier. Sometimes they get stuck to the container. All right, so some of this came out. So even though it was a big, tall container, it doesn't have very long roots. So we're really gonna break this up. And sometimes you'll find that your succulents are multiple plants in one container. So you can always play around with that too. So, got that, got the roots free from their old soil. We're gonna go ahead and stick some of those guys right in there. We're gonna clamp those down with a little bit of dirt, just kind of anchor it in. Doesn't have to be perfect yet, you just don't want it falling over. And then we're gonna make sure there's room for another tall guy. So what you're going for is visual interest. You want there to be height And you want there to be maybe almost an S curve where it's gonna draw your attention back down to the shining star. Pretty little rosette right in the front of the arrangement. All right, getting that one in. Gonna open up just a little bit more space. And sometimes you can just squeeze and tip a little upside down to make those hard to hold succulents come out just a bit easier. As you can see, this one has some dried leaves on the bottom. That's normal. It's the normal growth pattern. Just pluck those off. Squeeze the roots. And we're gonna nestle that in, so I just hold it very gently on the undersides of the leaves. And we just get that wiggled in. I'm probably gonna tilt it up just a little bit so we have it looking at us. And with these, you have to hold it a bit while you get all the soil, even under those bottom leaves in the front there. You don't wanna leave any air pockets. I like to use my fingers for this. You can also use a paintbrush to really get in those small spaces. And I'm trying not to touch the center of the succulent too much, because again, it has a very fine dust that will leave fingerprints and it won't come back. I'm getting it all cinched in. Okay, let me take a look here. Yep, that looks nice. So before I go further with the decorating, I'm gonna use a little paintbrush to get in some of these small cracks and just really get that dust off and all that dirt, perlite, because it really goes everywhere when you're planting. Paintbrushes are my best friend for getting all these nice and clean. Okay, so these succulents were a little bit thirsty, so I'm gonna go ahead and water these fairly generously, just a few tablespoons per plant. You don't want to water overzealously in a closed container, and that's because there's no drain hole. The extra is gonna get absorbed by the charcoal, and then any that's not used is gonna evaporate because it's such a shallow pot. Now that we have our plants planted, again, you can go wild. You can add in more elements. Ooh, like these pretty big geodes. I love a good geode. So you can stick something like that in there. Add a little color pop. I like to add a little texture variety, and for as little as you have to water these, you could even do something like feathers, dried flowers. They're not gonna get oversaturated again and again since you're only watering every 3 to 4 weeks. So here we go. We have a beautiful larger arrangement. And it's taller in the back. It's definitely a one direction sort of arrangement. You can make them all the same size if you wanted. It just depends on where you are placing it in your home. But make sure it's either under a grow light or a west facing window. There we have it. We have made a few beautiful arrangements. We've learned about the different needs for succulents and cacti, and based on what they look like and their shape. Thanks for taking the time to learn about succulents and arranging them here at Honey Plant. Let us know if there's any other videos you'd like us to make.